All right, so I guess we can get started. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. Today, we're going to see a new episode of the ITOM Visibility and Governance webinar series, also part of the Live on ServiceNow webinar series. In particular, today, we're going to see how to discover Kubernetes environments with the new Service Graph Connector for Open Telemetry. My name is Gian Mario De Luigi, and I'm part of the outbound product management team covering ITOM Visibility and Governance. And together with me today, we're going to have Dennis Goyedin. So Dennis, please, you can introduce yourself. I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry about that.
Thanks.
So, hello, everyone. My name is Dennis Guyadine. I'm a senior staff outbound product manager in the Cloud Observability business unit, and I'm focused primarily on the integration between cloud native and ServiceNow.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dennis. So, as I was saying, this webinar is also part of Live on ServiceNow webinar series, which is an interactive series of events where you will have the possibility to talk to subject matter experts to speed deployment adoption and achieve value faster with ServiceNow solutions. You can either scan the QR code here or just access the link that has just been posted via chat, and you can enroll to the series and select the events of your interest. Now, before we keep going, please make sure that everyone is muted. Today, we're going to use the Q&A feature to ask questions throughout the sessions, and please make sure that whenever you're asking questions, you introduce yourself. We're really looking forward to see who you are. And also, please participate in the polls. We're going to have a few polls today, and your insights will definitely be appreciated. And this session will be recorded and will be available on the same page of the registration for this webinar. So on the community page. And after this session, it will be prompted out to fill out a short survey. So we would really appreciate your feedback. I already introduced myself and Dennis as well, so we can skip this slide and we can get started with the first poll. So as the first poll that you're going to see soon, we want to ask you how you're currently discovering your Kubernetes environments. And you can select all the answers, all the options that apply to your case. So thank you very much. I see already a lot of you are participating. Very interesting insights that are coming up. So please make sure you all answer. I see many of you have inputted some answers. So I'll give another 10 seconds and then we can see the results. So I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we can see the results. So we can see that the vast majority of you are still not discovering Kubernetes, followed by the 42% of you that are discovering Kubernetes environments, leveraging ServiceNow discovery patterns. Then the rest are using either third-party solutions, manually importing records, or using CNO. But they are the minority in this case. So thanks very much for participating. This is only 1 out of 3, so please keep engaged and keep being engaged with us. Now, before we start with today's proper topic, we wanted to first of all cover what's a Service Graph Connector. So whenever we think about options to populate your CMDB, you may want to use third-party data sources, not necessarily with the typical traditional ways of performing discovery. And this is when Service Graph Connectors are useful. They are useful for many different cases because they reduce the staleness risk allowing you to always have accurate data and improving data quality by having multiple data sources. So as we just said, having multiple data sources is very important for many organizations, and they in general simplify the process for adding resources with the certified and supported integrations. As a matter of fact, as of the plan for Q4 2023, we can see all sorts of connectors that are offered or planned or that are already with the early access beta version. So we can identify many different categories here, such as the cloud and the software or server network, or monitoring observability use cases, or endpoint and IT asset management, security, or even manufacturing, IoT, and telecommunications. So we really have a vast, a very wide range of service graph connectors that are, again, very useful for three main reasons: because they are tested and supported by ServiceNow, and they are either built by ServiceNow or an ISV partner, and they support multi-source and reconciliation. So you can leverage all the functions of the CMDB and have it configured in the best possible way. So again, there is one single source of truth for many companies, and that needs to be the CMDB. But we can populate the CMDB with agentless or agent-based discovery, the more traditional way that I just mentioned before, when leveraging the mid server typically, or with your currently existing tools. So you have already pre-approved ways to connect to your existing tools and automatically populate your CMDB to keep consistency and having one single data model in one platform, leveraging one single architecture. This was a quick introduction to have a bit of a better context to the service graph connectors, which are effectively third-party data integrations with your CMDB. And now we're going to see better what's the topic for today's session. So the new service graph connector for OpenTelemetry. So Dennis, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Gene. You want me to share my screen? Let me go.
And please make sure to everyone to leverage the Q&A section, so we'll make sure to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
Yep. So before I start, I wanted to highlight challenges with discovering Kubernetes, or just challenges with Kubernetes in general. The biggest one that's out there is security, because of just the nature of security of Kubernetes, because it's something that's still fairly new. It has a lot of layers of abstraction. So there's a lot of attack vectors that you have to be aware of, and that's some of the challenges that's related to security. From a complexity standpoint, it requires a lot of domain expertise, I would say, is because there's a lot of moving parts related to it. There's a lot of teams that's involved, and the environment that's typically associated with is in the cloud or on-prem, and those containers are very ephemeral. So there's a lot of pieces to be worried about. From a scalability standpoint, it does go at a very large scale, but as you scale it out, you run into a lot of other challenges as well. From a deployment standpoint, monitoring, load balancing, resource allocation, because if you're running thousands of containers in an environment, you got to worry that you're not starving some resources that are out there, which leads to the next one: resource requirements. It becomes very expensive to manage it, because you have to manage all those various components and resources. And the last piece is there's a huge skill gap in Kubernetes adoption. So if your organization is moving towards adopting cloud native technologies, the organization itself needs to also keep up in pace with it. And then this leads to how do you actually support these teams, because at the end of the day, the teams that are operating this is SRE and DevOps teams. And they have this deep domain expertise in this space. And typically, when you're supporting this kind of, I would say, a new world, you want to use tools that are pretty much Kubernetes native, that support this space. Because if you speak to them and you're talking about some kind of, legacy tooling that you want to bring to bear and start implementing it here, they're going to probably ignore you. They typically would ignore you because it's related to a security issue, because they don't want to give you, super user access or things like a bearer token, because those kind of things are constantly rotated. And if you do have access to it, you can, exploit, those clusters if somebody, malicious has access to it. The thing that I see a lot in this space is that folks are hacking Kubernetes and doing Bitcoin mining, although Bitcoin itself is kind of, having its own challenges right now. Which leads to the various Kubernetes discovery approaches. So on the two on the left are the agentless approaches, which is just using patterns. We started off with the pattern-based discovery, which requires, again, a bearer token and your cloud credentials. The automated Kubernetes discovery scheduling, that's basically, I would say, patterns for managed Kubernetes. So every cloud provider has their own Kubernetes distribution. And with those Kubernetes distributions, they make it easy because they alleviate the need for you to manage a control plane. You just focus on your coding containers and your workloads. The CNO methodology is basically similar to ours. It requires you to run a set of containers in your environment. From a CNO perspective, it's really just the mid server and ACC that are containerized and running your environment. And the SGC for OTel is running the Open Telemetry collector. There's several methods where they're more useful at. I would say if all you're using is EKS, AKS, and GKE, I would say the automated Kubernetes discovery scheduling is great for you to use. The only thing is, from a security perspective, you need to require cloud credentials, right? The two on the right require you just to run these agents within the cluster itself, which alleviates the need for you to provide credentials to the ServiceNow admin, and you can start deploying right away. The thing that's unique with the Service Graph Connector for OpenTelemetry is that it's, I would say, more Kubernetes native, but it is using something called OpenTelemetry. So I'll get into what OpenTelemetry is. So before I go to poll 2, before we go to the OpenTelemetry, just go to poll 2 on, what challenges are you facing today, as you're discovering Kubernetes. Some organizations, are constrained because this environment constantly, churns, spins up, spins down, and they want to understand what the, use cases are to bring the data in. I would say, for the most part, as we're speaking to customers, they still want to have that, visibility into understand exactly, every resource that's getting spun up. They want to do an inventory, auditing, reporting, and things like that. How much longer for this poll? Let's say another 5 seconds and we'll end it.
Yep.
And let's stop right there. And let's share the results. All right. So the bulk of it is exactly what I touched on before, is the security constraints. There are a lot of SREs and DevOps are not going to give up the keys of the kingdom. Right. The next piece is you're not using K8. Okay. So that's a third of you. The next one is, again, no value discovering ephemeral workloads. And the last one is cost, because it could get very expensive over time. Thanks for that. So I'll go to the next slide. Let me just close this. All right. So let's go into OpenTelemetry and talk about what it is. So we already talked about Kubernetes. Kubernetes, if you don't know, is a cloud native computing foundation open source project. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation runs under the auspices of the Linux Foundation. So any project there is not owned by any specific vendor. It's open like Linux is itself. And OpenTelemetry is the second most popular project right after Kubernetes under the CNCF. Linux, again, is the most popular one. It's a vendor neutral, set of tools and frameworks, SDKs, APIs, and things like that. And its focus is to really, encapsulate that telemetry data, all those signals, and really, ship it to any backend. So its goal is really to collect it, generate this telemetry data that is collecting, and basically shipping it over to any backend. So it's collecting traces, metrics, as well as logs. And right now, every vendor that does anything related to application performance monitoring or observability. All of the cloud vendors, everybody's adopting now this Open Telemetry framework, because the value that it has now is that in the past, every vendor kind of dictates how you do your instrumentation, and it leads to lock-in. And also, if you're investing in agent technology, a lot of your R&D goes into that agent, software itself, and you can only go as fast, as that one vendor. So you're kind of trapped and locked in. In the world of cloud native, every team is typically adopting, cloud native, in pockets. They pick their own tools, their own languages, their own frameworks, and they have to start instrumenting their code base, right? If they want to move to another team, or they just want to ship their code and have another team, take over, now they have to relearn everything from scratch. So this gives you that high quality and then portable telemetry to provide more effective observability. And because every vendor is supporting it, it's as you can see, it's picking up a lot of pace and a lot of traction in the field. So now let's go into Service Graph Connector for OpenTelemetry. So what this is, again, we're using that OpenTelemetry framework to capture all of this telemetry data and then shipping it over to the Cloud Observability backend. The Cloud Observability backend is taking all those, telemetry data, is taking something called semantic conventions, which is really just, tags, labels from a telemetry standpoint, and converting it all to CI data. So based on what the attributes are, if it's a daemon set or a deployment set, and again, these are all Kubernetes nomenclature and terminology, it's going to assess all of that and ship it over to the appropriate tables. It's also going to take this span data and instrument or assemble these traces, and then those traces are going to create these maps for you. And then it's going to be imported into ServiceNow. So what that means is that you do not need to create these service maps. The system, this cloud observability solution itself, is creating those maps for you, and all you're doing is importing it. So once you set this up, it's really just turning it on and specify how frequently you want everything to be updated. So we're going to be discovering these cloud native apps and workloads. So these are going to be the Kubernetes objects, the Kubernetes workloads. We're going to tie it into your ITSM workflows as well. So now you can understand what your blast radius is. Whenever you make a change on anything, you can understand what the upstream and downstream impact is. And it's going to integrate with your existing applications. So many organizations are not, building these cloud native apps in a vacuum. These are going to be integrated with some, existing, application or infrastructure that you have been running in your environment for a very long time. But now with these cloud native technologies, you're making it available to your end users over the web. If your system of records running on a database, and on a weekend or some in a quarter you're making a change to it, you wouldn't really know if it's affecting those customer-facing applications. So with this integration, you're able to assess what that impact is all the way upstream and downstream. Right, and again, this slide kind of highlights it. I would say everything in the left where it has those logos on top, that's all your cloud environments where you're typically going to be running your Kubernetes clusters. You can also be running Red Hat OpenShift, which is also Kubernetes. Again, we're using that telemetry data, shipping it over to us, and we're assembling those maps and bringing it over to CIs. If you're using event management, we could also ingest those alerts as well. The piece there too on the relationship to traditional state, that's and I'll go into a little more details, is those inferred services that we're also associating with these cloud native apps. Right, so again, what's different than what we currently have is that we're not using a mid server or ACC, we're just using this telemetry data. That if you're using Kubernetes, you're probably using OpenTelemetry in some shape or fashion. Either it's the upstream OpenTelemetry with your vendor, or the OpenTelemetry software is bundled in your vendor's client software in their agent, right? So we're using that same telemetry data and basically importing those service maps as well as those CI data as well. So from an architectural standpoint, what you will need to do is run a collector in your cluster. There's also an operator, which is optional. That's a Kubernetes operator for OpenTelemetry. It just does a little more heavy lifting there. Again, it's optional if you're not using the collector today. And all the collector does is, if you're instrumenting those applications, the collector is the one that collects all of that telemetry data. And then the collector is the one that's going to be sending it over to the cloud observability backend. And the cloud observability backend is the one that's, assessing all that telemetry data, taking, again, there's semantic conventions that it receives from the telemetry data and associating it with the CI records, right? If it's a deployment, if it's a replica set, the nodes, the pods, and things like that, and then as well as those topology maps. The way the solution is bundled, again, all you need is the discovery license, and you have access to the SGC for OpenTelemetry. So there is no special licensing required for this. All you need is the discovery SKU. All right, this slide is actually supposed to be moved up forward. I don't know what happened here, but going back to OpenTelemetry, Gartner has also took notice of this technology as well. And they have identified some areas where it actually helps an organization from an innovation standpoint, because as I mentioned before, previously, every vendor kind of dictates how you actually instrument your software from a cloud native perspective. With OpenTelemetry, it kind of unlocks this and democratize it for any organization to leverage it to provide improved observability. Again, it's a very fast moving project. It simplifies monitoring, because a lot of the complexity is removed. You don't need to read through manuals and things like that to use it. It's documented, and because of the project velocity, they're looking at ways to actually improve it to make it even easier for customers to use. Better collaboration amongst teams. I mentioned it before. Again, each team is not going to be in a vacuum of how they implement or use these tools. They have the portability across teams. And cost savings, I would say at a high level, you're not paying for agents. Anybody can deploy OpenTelemetry. You don't got to pay anybody anything, right? And looking at this is something that's going to, expand within 2 to 5 years. And there's also something called observability-driven development, where you're incorporating observability into the development environment. So you're instrumenting during the, using something called similar to test-driven development, where you're bringing observability, at the forefront at the beginning. Going back to the architecture piece, again, all you need is OpenTelemetry in your cluster. OpenTelemetry can look at metrics, logs, and traces, sending it to the cloud observability backend. We're not going to go into the cloud observability solution itself, but it's a system to handle and process telemetry data at scale and provides workflows, there for you to quickly understand where the source or the needle in the haystack is. And then we have workflows to help you, quickly identify or triage those issues as well. We can quickly associate that to a deployment, to a new version change, and things like that, to get to a root cause. But we're leveraging that solution for your to integrate with the CMDB, and the Service Graph Connector is using an API that was purpose built for this use case, and that API is, again, all it is enabling us to I would say, extract the data and then convert it to data that's usable from a CMDB perspective. If you're using event management, we also have a hook into event management as well, where we can just ingest the alerts from cloud observability and provide additional workflows. Hold on for 1 second. Losing my voice. Go to the next slide. All right, so I'll go to a demo now. If we have questions, hopefully everybody got able to answer it. Share my new screen. All right. All right, so to get access to this Service Graph Connector, all you need to do is go to the ServiceNow store. And at the bottom, let me make this a little larger. It'll tell you what the requirements are. All you need is a discovery license, integration comments with the CMDB, the class models. This piece is optional, and it's only required if you own event management. And all this is going to be able to do is, automatically help you with that webhook. And for this demo environment, I'm using the OpenTelemetry demo. There's something to compare and contrast to. This is how this OpenTelemetry demo, if you deploy it in your Kubernetes cluster, how it will look like. A service map doesn't typically go into this detail, but it's telling you what protocol is actually in use here and how these pieces are communicating with one another. That's how this map looks like. But let's go back to the guided setup. And all you need to do here is you need to set up the organization. What is the name of the organization that you configured? Again, in the Cloud Observability solution. Whoops. I've used Unified Demo. I have an API key, and then I have to test the connection. And this piece here is really, if you have the Cloud Observability solution set up, you're going to add a bunch of projects. Typically, by default, you only have two. Well, we won't say prod, one is dev. For here, we're only using the SGC for OpenTelemetry demo. We have to set it as false to say that it's not excluded, meaning it's going to be included. That's what the setup is. Then after that, you just execute and run it. There's a few more steps here. The real major piece here is when you want to actually configure it to run. If I go here, and again, this is nothing new with any Service Graph Connector. This is the same flow. You specify the frequency here, and then you click Execute Now. Now, once you do that, let's go back here. We're going to go to our out-of-the-box Kubernetes dashboard, and everything is populated here. So this is out-of-the-box. This is not showing every single CI class type. This is showing the major ones you would typically look at. And what I can do is I can go into my cluster. I'll select the SGC for OpenTelemetry cluster. And this is all the information that was brought over here via that OpenTelemetry telemetry data. So we have your nodes. We have calculated application services, which I'll get back to in a few, namespace, deployments, replica sets. These are some endpoints. This is nothing specific to Kubernetes, but this is how these pieces are, attaching to one another. Endpoint from, and there's some more stuff here. If I go back to calculated application service, any service map that gets imported from a third-party system falls under calculated application service, meaning that it's not something that was created natively within ServiceNow, right? We're just importing maps from a third party. It's called calculated application service, but just think of it as a dynamic application service that's dynamically assembled from a third party. We go into our dashboard view. And again, this is anybody that's a CMDB owner, you have to worry about completeness, compliance, correctness. Gian already mentioned that this is a Service Graph Connector. When we build Service Graph Connectors, it has to adhere to the identification reconciliation engine to make sure that there's no duplicates and stale information or incomplete data. We also adhere to the common service data model. If you want to, expand on this and have your, service portfolios and things like that as well integrated here also, that's also going to be set up here. And then last but not least, you can integrate with your change workflows, your ITSM workflows. So you can see there was a change associated with this cluster and somebody's making a change to a service. We have some information here. If we want to go into this record, we can go into it. And me as a person that cares about this stuff, I want to make sure that, okay, if somebody wants to make a change to the service, I can even go into the Cloud Observability solution, again, if you have the license, and see if, how is this thing operating? If it's operating normally, then okay, I'll approve, or we can go ahead with that change. So that's all for this part, which is pretty straightforward. The next piece is the calculated application service. So these are all of these dynamic service maps that got imported via this Service Graph Connector, via this integration. You can see right here, it's coming from OpenTelemetry. We have 21 of them. And what I would like to do here, before I go into this, actually, once I load this map, I just want to go back to this demo architecture here. It is a little, can't really see it too clearly, but I also want to show you how the map looks like in the Cloud Observability solution. So this is how the map looks like here. There is a way to get to an advanced map that looks into the one that I showed you before, that looks into gRPC and things like that. But we really just want to look at this one. What we also want to see is that inferred service. So I take it off. This is a pure cloud native map. But again, these maps are not going to be running in a vacuum. They're going to be integrated with some legacy or some existing application. This application can also be, in the cloud as well, right? That you did a lift and shift for. So it can be an Oracle database. But for our scenario, this is a SQL component. This part that's associated with this feature flag service. If I go back here, this is the same map here, and you see that this feature flag store is running on a Postgres database. So let's go back to our calculated application service. Oh, I guess it never loaded. Let's open it up. All right, so this is our map that was imported. And you see that this Postgres database here is here also. So there is some work that has to be done to bring this over. So let's go back here and let's show you the inferred services. So we go to this inferred services piece. You'll see this component here. You had to actually manually associate this together. If I go back here, you have to go over here and search for, and select the one you want to bring in. And once you select it and bring it in, it becomes part of that map, right? What we can also do here, if I want to go into this front end component and open the dependency view, I talked about all the various CI types. A service map doesn't show you all of that. It's just, is a service aware CMDB. Let's go into more details here. Let's make this a little larger. Let's force this. So we see the calculated application service here, the feature flag. We see the Postgres component. We get to see the OTel demo piece. We see it's a Kubernetes deployment. We get to see the cluster. So we get to see all the level of detail we need to see over here. And again, we see all the associated CIs and everything else here as well. If I go back here, let's go into this Postgres component, because again, all this is that there was a span that made a call out here, but this is a non-instrumented application. And that's what an inferred service is. An inferred service is a non-instrumented application, or there's a service that there was a span associated with it. If we want to, we can go into this Postgres database and let's take a look at it and see what this is related to. All right, so we see this Postgres is running on Linux. It's tracked. If we want, we see there's a Tomcat component, so it's part of another map. So if I go back here, whoops, go to service map. Let's go to application service. We see that this Postgres is part of this rewards processing application. Let's go to rewards processing. And here it is. Here's your rewards processing application. And here's my Postgres database. Let's to validate. 1835. 1835. So we know that we're actually sharing. So when we deploy this application, we deploy everything Kubernetes, but we don't want to deploy a net new Postgres database. So we're sharing this Postgres database with the rewards processing application. So now somebody made a change here. We can assess what that impact is, for this application, but also to the application we have running here as well. And that's the end of my demo. I'll pause to take questions.
Yeah, we answered most of the questions, actually. I see Ross is answering the second last one. And then we have just the last question here that has been unanswered. So they're asking if the client should use the OpenTelemetry application.
Ross no longer there. So yes, so client should use. I'm not too clear on the question. So really anybody can use the OpenTelemetry SGC. All you need is a discovery license to use it. And the application, it's really it's an agent. We'll post links to it. Actually, let me go back to my slides. I do have some links there.
Yeah, I
So
think
Dennis, just to be clear, this only works if a customer is already using OpenTelemetry. We wouldn't necessarily recommend that a customer goes and implements OpenTelemetry just to use the Service Graph Connector.
Actually, that is a recommendation. That is a recommendation, Steve.
Can you explain that further then?
Yep. So again, for the most part, observability itself is a journey onto itself. And if you have challenges bringing data over to the CMDB, and the current methods are something that your SRE or DevOps team are not approving because it breaks either a security model or it's a resource constraint, they can go ahead and use the OpenTelemetry collector. It's less than 50 megs in size, right? And once you deploy it, all you need to do is specify an auth key on where to actually ship the telemetry data over to on the Kubernetes side. And after that, you're doing everything from a SGC perspective. So yes, we do recommend customers, if they're still starting, and we have spoke to almost 100 customers already about this Service Graph Connector. Some are more mature than others and already are adopting OpenTelemetry, but some organizations are still early in their journey and they're having challenges bringing data into the CMDB and bringing data into CMDB. I know it's not useful to some organizations, but many organizations, they want to keep track of every single component that has an IP address. There was one vendor that let their VPN went down. It caused some business impact to the organization, and now they need to keep track of everything that has an IP address. And they have thousands of containers. So now they want to bring everything into the CMDB. Some other organizations that need it for auditing, for reporting, for those kind of use cases as well. They also want to bring that data into CMDB. So for them, using OTel was a very easy way to do it. Plus, it helps kickstart their observability journey as well. Plus, again, and I'll keep hammering on this, but it's something that's Kubernetes native. So if you are an SRE or an engineering organization or a DevOps team, it's using the tools and some of the frameworks that are very familiar to them already. So it's not something they have to reinvent the wheel to do something that they're probably not familiar with using today. So we did the demo. I want to go back to this poll. I just want to highlight that as we're going through this poll, because we're using OpenTelemetry, Kubernetes is not the end game. It's really any technology that can use OpenTelemetry can also be brought over to the CMDB, right? Because all of these newer, toolings and technologies out there that fall under cloud native, it's focused on organizations building these net new applications. And as they're building these net new applications, they still need to basically have the ability to leverage some kind of observability solution to understand where that needle in the haystack is, because there's a lot of moving parts. Some of these microservices are tens to hundreds or thousands of components. Spotify is actually a customer of ours as well, and they're running this stuff at really massive scale. And for you to get the pinpoint where the bottleneck is, you need some kind of observability solution to help you get there. So these are some that we have identified to add to our roadmap as we're speaking to customers. We just like to know which ones you guys feel is the next key technology we should be focusing on. We have time. Still okay. I guess we'll end the poll because it stopped. Let's share the results. Wow, so that's great to hear. So serverless computing and function as a service is number one by far. The next one is API Gateway, then Kafka, and last but not least is Service Mesh. So actually, thanks everyone for the poll. This actually helps us from a roadmap planning perspective. Let me just share this. All right, that's all I had. Let's go to the
I will reshare my screen now. I see there are still a couple of questions there that need to be answered before we keep going. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yep. I'll let me go answer some questions.
Yeah. Can you see the questions there in the Q&A?
Yeah, I see it. Okay, so the first one that might be for you or Steve. Do you have any plans to implement Service Graph Connectors for Fortinet? We submitted a request early on this.
Right. We don't actually own the Service Graph Connector roadmap. There is another entirely different product team. Maybe Steve has some insight from them.
We do not have, I do not have any insights into that. We are working on patterns for Fortinet for our firewall audits and reporting solution. So perhaps that would help with that request, but we can find out and get back to you guys.
Thank you. All right, then next question. We are currently implementing Kubernetes Discovery. Sometimes I am asked by the business, how will this data be used? What is the elevator pitch answer to this question? So I kind of touched on it. I would say from a CMDB perspective, it's around auditing, reporting, enterprise-wide governance, things like that. Those are typically what many organizations use it for. So if you're using a CMDB for those kind of use cases, you can use it for that. There's also, I would say, the asset management use case. Maybe you want to look into all the software running inside those containers and keep track of that as well. That would be another use case. And then we also have some other integrations with Kubernetes from a security perspective. So you can also integrate into your enterprise-wide, SecOps practice also. I don't know if you have any other questions, Steve or Gian, on that, because you probably have seen that too in the past.
Okay. Yeah, we still have another question on again. So for Steve, one question is that they are challenging to discover Fortinet wireless access points, and they are able to discover Cisco WAPs, WAPs. So
understood. That question there is not specific to this webinar. We can take that one offline. Yeah. It's about a service graph connector that's outside of OpenTelemetry. So yeah, we can follow up with that.
Yep. So I see Ross is handling Troy's one and Kim is handling Avinash's one. There's a last one by Daniel. What are the CSTM implications of automatically creating calculated services? Will there need to be manual associated with existing business applications? So I did speak to one of the product managers here. Any microservice is what they are that gets imported via this integration falls under business services, is what I was told. But if you want, you can go and modify that. But when this was built, this is adhering to the common service data model. So you could associate it with existing applications too, if you need to.
Nice. So
Kim is working the last one.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks everyone for the great engagement today. We will share on the same page of the community where you could register to this webinar. We'll share the deck, and you will also find the recording. So these are some of the resources that you will be able to leverage once you will download the deck. And please, we saw many ideas even in the Q&A section. We always encourage all of you to submit your ideas in the idea portal. We really listen to these ideas. As a matter of fact, those ones that get submitted for more than 10 different, in more than 10 different cases, let's say, will be directly prompted to the product managers in order to be considered for the roadmap. So this is another great tool for all of you to influence our products and the future of our products. Now we have a few call to action items. So First of all, try out these capabilities in sub-production and showcase really the value to the stakeholders in your organization and get them really excited about these capabilities. We are offering these capabilities specifically. They can be tried out for free as of now before it's GA, as we mentioned before. You can connect with your new friends, of course, outside of this workshop. And we are here for you. So you already asked a few questions, but we're always here for you to help. And please, whatever success stories you have, we're more than happy to listen to your great success stories. So just feel free to share them with us. We'll have, as usual, further future sessions, especially for the ITOM Visibility and Governance, further episodes in the rest of this year. So please just make sure you're enrolled, you subscribe to the Live on ServiceNow webinar series that includes also this series of webinars. This is the overall value that you can achieve specifically for service operation excellence with ITOM Visibility. And that was it for today. Thank you very much. Please make sure you fill out the survey at the end of this event. We are very happy and thankful for all the great interactions we had today. So we're looking forward to see you until next time. And have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.